Hi there, let's do Wyckoff technical analysis to let us know where Ethereum is at and where it's heading to. If you are new to my session, here are the 3 key takeaways you can expect. So let's start with the weekly chart of Ethereum. So last week we were talking about the sign of weakness is pretty much confirmed, and whether there will be another sign of weakness coming up or a bounce towards the last point of supply. As of this moment, this week's candlestick is still too early to tell what's going to happen next. Currently, there is early signs of finding some sort of support around the 3070 level. This level, when we get to the daily chart, it will be clearer what or where these supports are coming from. So if we come across here, it's not very obvious because those aren't really some sort of key levels or key stages of Wyckoff. So when we get to the daily chart, I'll let you know what those are. So getting back to the next stage, if there's this bounce, so if it bounces off from this 3070 level, re-challenge either the 3200 or 3540, and then eventually come down to the 3070 again, that will form these 2 stages. But it's not a must, it's just a guess that it would happen that way, because another way that it can happen, if we take reference to what happened over here just in the first quarter of this year, okay, I'm not talking about a few years back, it did not take a pause until it gets to this white solid line. This white solid line is the long-term playground zone ceiling. Okay, what's the long-term playground zone? Is the box or the channel that started from the very early days around 2017 coming into all the way to where we are now, so for almost 10 years time. About 70-80% of the time, other than the crazy distribution peaks, Ethereum has been trading within this box. So last time it returned to this box, wasn't too far back in history. It was during February all the way till July this year. Okay, so don't be surprised if this time Ethereum comes back to revisit this box again. So this is the thing that happened that I said maybe it will come down to around the green key level of 2800, because that's where exactly the ceiling has climbed to. For Ethereum, this long-term playground zone, it's similar to Bitcoin that I have put in. It's not a horizontal box. Let's assume, similar to Bitcoin, there's some inflation factor that's driving the long-term trend of Ethereum that is trending upwards instead of going horizontal like the other altcoins. Because if you look at other altcoins in those sessions, that long-term playground zone is flat. It's just horizontal. It's just the fundamental difference between these big 2 versus the rest. Okay? But when time goes on, some other projects would follow the same, in my view, depending on the adoption of those projects. Okay, if some of those get into mainstream adoption, then the horizontal trend will change. Alright, so don't expect the bounce is a must. Be prepared that it will come down to the white, meaning 2800, before we see some sort of sideways trading. And eventually, the lowest point may be somewhere in the middle of the box, and that's pointing to somewhere around 1500 to 1600. If it really pause or stop at around this white dashed line, where the selling climax back in April was. Okay, so this white dashed line, again, is sloping upwards. That cuts across the previous 2002-2003 extended accumulation cycle. But if you look at the distribution and accumulation cycles across the years since 2021, each cycle actually lasted more than a year. It's pretty evenly distributed, I would say. Except the one, this mini accumulation that we had back in earlier this year, between March to June. Otherwise, if we look at this, from January 2021 to this point, the preliminary support that lasted for almost 500 days. And from preliminary support to this spot where the price climbs to the orange key level of 2,200, that's 560 days around. Okay, so it's roughly every 500 days we have a cycle that starts and completes from end to end. Likewise with this one, about 450 to 60 days for this distribution cycle in 2024. Now, we've got a quick accumulation that lasted only for about 100 and 120 days, and the current distribution that we are at also at around 120 days now. Okay, I'm not sure whether this is something that's going to be the new norm for crypto, because the previous cycles basically lasted for a year and a half on average for these 3 cycles. This time, from last year accumulation, well actually earlier this year accumulation, within just 1 year we've got 1 accumulation and 1 distribution. Alright, so just a bit about the duration of the cycles. So given the big picture is still heading towards a potential preliminary support stage, okay, this is where Ethereum seems to be heading to, alright, because it has went through all the way below the sign of weakness. So if we look across here, this point, the yellow key level 2,500 is critical. If it passes this point, I would pretty much define this as the start of accumulation. Because if it bounces from above, there's still a chance for it to come up for another second test. Okay, assuming there are good enough news for Ethereum to come. Let me bring this to a lighter color so it's easier to read for you. Okay, so I'm not certifying it that it has finished the distribution yet. Okay, there's still a chance for it to bounce out. But the tendency towards this side is still pretty high. Going to further north, remains at a lower chance. So let's get to the daily chart and see what it's telling us and where this 3070 is coming from. Okay, today the candlestick is telling us it continues to receive rejection or some pretty strong selling from the key level of 3,200. It's the 4th consecutive day that we see this rejection from this solid light blue line. Previously, last week, it was still acting as the support. So this support has shifted to the 3070. That provided support on November 4th, and if we look towards the left, we'll see exactly what stages are those. This isn't the one. It's further left. So back in November 2024 and January 2025, just this year, the sign of weaknesses as well as the PSY period. You see this line provided support for those stages. So that's why currently we're seeing the price taking a pause over here. But be careful, because during the climb back in July, there wasn't much activity around this area. A little bit lower, yeah, there was some battle around that, but it lasted only for 3 days. Compared to what happened over here that lasted for over 2 weeks, and combining this, that's almost like I think 2 to 3 months time. staying around, battling these levels. This time it's not the same. So I am not surprised after these few days it will break the 3070 and come down to the 2800 green key level, like I mentioned when I share with you in the weekly chart. Okay, so as long as the price doesn't break above this downtrend box, especially is moving to the weaker side, the lower half of the box now, it's going to take quite some effort for it to break outside of this trend. Okay, or some very good news, like I said, also. So that's basically how the market is behaving right now, waiting for good news to save a whole lot of things. Not just crypto is shaking now. And to these time points, these triangles, potential breakout time, it's still far. It's near the end of the year. Okay, the earliest is this, if it stays above the 3070, that's sometime right before Christmas, assuming it trades horizontal. That's a breakout opportunity outside of this channel box. Otherwise, we have to wait for longer period of time, which isn't a surprise because I already mentioned from the very beginning, if Ethereum is really coming down for an accumulation cycle, it's definitely going to use the next couple of weeks to come to a level that the big players are going to accumulate again. So that's how the picture is looking right now. Because if it bounces, like I said, if it do sideways trading here and doesn't finish the distribution and returns to a second test, what we can expect to see is this kind of activity that happened back in August all the way into October in 2024. This patch of sideways trading. Okay, we are at a point that looks kind of similar to that now. So there was a buying climax, a second test, and then it went through a horizontal period before it got to the upthrust, that reached or breached the 4000 key level. And this time, we had our buying climax and potentially upthrust, depending on whether it's the blue or the yellow scenario. And now it's coming down to a level that's very close to that horizontal accumulation before the next peak or next test. Okay, we should use the term test in Wyckoff method. So if that's really the case, if it's not finishing its distribution, then it will eventually get to here. And remember in the beginning I said, the previous cycles lasted for somewhere between 450 to 500 days. So if we count from this point, the beginning of preliminary supply, the PSY, we are only under 30 days in. If it really is going to last for another 300 days, it's going to get into summer next year. Okay, assuming that's a very positive scenario, that some very good news come out and then it bounces to the upthrust or upthrust after distribution before it declines back to the long-term playground zone. Okay, so I've explained both the pessimistic and the optimistic scenarios. So depending on which one you believe would happen, the downside risk is that it may come back down to 1500 to 1600. Okay, even if you believe Ethereum is going to rebound and get to a higher point. So thanks for joining me. Moving